So what would happen is, one thing that you can do to kind of spice your tracks up is you go to a return, and typically you load up like a bunch of cool effects. We could have delays in here, reverbs, saturations, but something that's going to make a pretty kind of mad big effect sound. Then whilst the track is running, you literally, let's imagine that we had, like, you know, kick, bass, hats, synth and all the rest of it. You're going to pick some of your sounds and you'll just quickly do a send throw. So you're literally just throwing a very small slice of the audio from one of these tracks to your super send. So I don't know who came up with a name for it, but basically a send with a load of stuff on it. And what that does, of course, is you get a little slice of audio that then gets blasted through delays and reverbs and returns and all kinds of good stuff. So if you are doing that and it's getting out of control, first things first, if you're automating this, you might want to go back in and just make sure that you're sending similar amounts to the return. Because obviously if I'm, you know, doing this on push, or even worse, like a mouse, which I sometimes do when I'm bloody lazy, you might have some that are like full beans and you're sending the entire 100% of your signal to your return track, and other times you might have only got like 60%. And of course, as a result, the volumes coming out of it are going to be wildly different. Now, you want some variation in there, I would say, or it doesn't sound very human. But ultimately, if you find that you've peaked it a few times and gone a bit crazy, just get in and deal with the automation. So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do is go to the end of your super send and put a limiter on there, or some really hard compression. And what that obviously is going to do is mean that when you're turning this up, when you push it harder, it's going to drive into the limiter, which is then going to start turning it down. But it will still sound different, because a louder amount of volume will have gone into each of the effects. So they're all going to sound a bit different, particularly if we've got saturation or other coloration on there, which is going to be driven hotter. All of a sudden we'll be getting more harmonics and frequencies coming through. And plus, the RMS, the average volume, is still going to be louder. Even though the limiter is taking down the peaks of it, you're still going to get a perceived increase in volume. So that is a nice way of still keeping a whole bunch of variation in there, whilst simultaneously allowing yourself that extra kind of expression. So they're the first two parts. Now the third part that you've alluded to in here is something with high feedbacks in there. So this can be a case of if you've got, and I'm going to imagine that maybe you're using a feedback loop, which is where you would use something like a dub delay, and you can literally be going in, and again, let me show you this. It might be a situation where what you're doing is you've got your sends enabled and you're sending the return back to itself. So picture the situation. We're sending a piece of, you know, maybe it's a 16th, let's say, we've quickly chucked in and chucked out, like you would if you were DJing. You've sent that slice of audio to the return track. It goes through the return track, picking up all of the effects, and then you may be sending that back into itself. So it comes back round the system and goes in, creating a feedback loop. So this is quite a common thing to do if we're creating builds and other interesting things. But as a result, you can often get a pretty nasty build up of frequencies. So there's a trick that works really nicely if you're getting a frequency build up and it's starting to scream and resonate. If you're doing something like this, even if you were to put a limiter on there, you're still going to get this frequency build up. You'll control the volume, but you'll still get this tone, this screaming, a little bit like I was talking about in Brian's track, where there was one tone that was overriding the situation. That wasn't for a feedback loop, but it's just that one resonance in the track. If you've got something like that going on, then you can add some modulation, and something like auto filter, or any filter that will modulate if you're not using Ableton, for example. And you can just have something like this going on that's sweeping up and down the chain. And what this does is it stops there being a massive build up of frequencies if you're using this kind of feedback loop, because the frequency has a chance to die down because it's no longer feeding back through itself, and then we just keep moving. So no one of any one feedback is enabled to feed back on itself and on itself feeding through. Typically this is a problem if you've got a delay in there. So that kind of forever delay trap that you can fall into, which is, it's a beautiful atmospheric sound, and I'm imagining that's what you're talking about when you're creating a big kind of wash of atmosphere. That sort of really nice movement, if you're modulating that just by turning the LFO on in the filter, or any filter with that capability, which is most of them because they're designed to move, that will stop a build up of frequencies. So that's how you can control frequencies, and how you can control wild kind of, out of control volumes as well, when you're using these kind of super sends and big atmospheres coming out of your returns.